A 1/8 black person does not have to make a concerted effort to be accepted. They simply are treated as white. Using the term white passing is like trying to fit a D battery into a AAA slot. It just doesn't work with our current framework. Even someone like the rapper Logic, who is referred to as white passing due to the fact that he looks white but has a black parent, this man quite literally is doing the opposite of passing because he is very vocal about the fact that he is half black.
In my blood is the slave and the master.
If he was truly passing, he would be actively denying his black ancestry and trying to distance himself from it.
And I'm gonna say it again and again and again so that you fucking hear me this time.
Today's video is very juicy, but I want to start with something even juicier, a giveaway. Thanks to my friends at Valessa, everyone who signs up will win a free toy with their order. Valessa is the #1 company for all things sexual wellness, and I want to let you guys in on a little secret. Their first collection of silent toys are here. Meet the Whisper Collection, the world's first silent vibrators. Trust me, these things take the meaning of moving in silence to a whole other level. Let me show you. Did you hear that? Exactly. You can't hear anything. They are silent but deadly, and I don't understand this sorcery, but I love it. I don't care if you have roommates or flex walls, you can put your pleasure first without waking up the whole damn apartment or even a partner sleeping right next to you. There's the Whisper Bullet with 5 speeds. The power is insane. There's the Whisper Rabbit and the Whisper Vibe, which both have 6 vibration speeds. The Whisper Vibe gives you the quietest G-spot stimulation you'll find, while the Whisper Rabbit has independently adjustable clit and G-spot simulators in case you want to step it up another notch, but still move in silence. Everyone who signs up wins a free Whisper Vibe or a free Rose Suction toy with any Whisper purchase. Yes, the Rose Suction toy, the #1 viral TikTok toy that has taken the world by storm. It's an iconic suction vibrator that is beloved for a reason. So run, don't walk to get your free vibe at the link in the description. The Whisper toys will say silent, but can you? Hey guys, it's Amanda. Welcome back to my channel. Today I want to talk about the term white passing because I think we've kind of lost the plot with it.
Just got reminded of a time where a girl made a video about me and said that I was white passing. And that joint kind of blew me because, girl, what the fuck about me says white passing? I understand being mistaken for mixed or biracial, but white passing?
After seeing this TikTok, I wanted to talk about it because I feel like the phrase white passing is widely misunderstood and incorrectly used today.
Are you delusional?
For starters, the historical term is passing, not white passing, just passing. Passing occurred when a person who was categorized as black in the United States sought to be perceived as white. Individuals who were as little as 1/8 black passed for white because the one-drop rule classified them as black and therefore as inferior. So passing for white offered pathways to freedom, education, and equality. Passing was active. To pass for white, people didn't just assume you were white, you had to make choices to convince them. One of the biggest choices a person could make was to lie about their family, to deny any association with blackness, even if it meant cutting ties with those they were closest to. Today, the term white passing is widely misunderstood because it's employed to describe how someone looks, not choices they are making. It has become an aesthetic descriptor based on first impressions rather than a term that represents a concerted effort to be accepted as a member of another racial group.
You seriously think that I am white passing?
Unlike passing for white, the term white passing is subjective. In the past, it was much more clear. Passing for white was dependent on white people believing that you didn't have a drop of black blood in your body.
I'm afraid you made a mistake. I don't have any little colored girl in my class. But they said 3B. This is 3B, isn't it? Why, there's Sarah Jane. There's my baby.
You mean Sarah Jane Johnson?
Today, it seems to mean something entirely different, especially with how it's used online. Passing for white was deeply personal because it had to be. Often, it was dependent on people keeping a friend or a family member's Black ancestry a secret. Back in 1925, for example, a 1/8 Black woman was not white passing just because she had fair skin and light eyes. That woman would also have to separate herself from the Black community to successfully pass for white. The idea that someone who is mostly genetically white would need to pass for white seems absurd because it is. It's based on a rule that was not found in fact, but pseudoscience. I think most people understand that today, but we still can't seem to let go of the term white passing, especially online.
Never been called white passing until I got on the internet.
Now, the concept is less about white people accepting someone as white and more about asserting that a person of color has proximity to whiteness. And notice that I said person of color, not Black person. Historically, for a person to pass for white, it was understood that that person was Black. But this newer term, white passing, is often used outside the context of just Black and white people. The term white passing has taken on a life of its own. It's not just that people are using the term passing incorrectly. This new word seems to be an entirely different thing, one that is unique to the 21st century, just as passing for white was unique during a time period when racial discrimination based on blood quantums was legal. So, in today's video, I want to explore how the term passing for white has evolved over the years and if it's finally time to retire it. Passing for white, or passing as a race that you were not born as, feels so incongruous to modern life that when this actually does occur, all we can do is laugh at how weird, unnecessary, and absurd it is.
Then I say, yeah, I do, I am Black.
But in the past, racial passing could be a matter of life and death, and it all started with the one-drop rule.
People either treat me like I'm some racist Aryan motherfucker, or racist ass white people treat me like, send your ass back to Africa. Like, these are things that people have said to me.
The one-drop rule is actually less of a rule and more of a social and legal principle that was used to uphold slavery and maintain white supremacy. It asserted that any person with even one ancestor of African ancestry, aka one drop of Black blood, is considered Black. The one-drop rule might sound scientific, but it's rooted in racism, not biology or genetics. In the beginning of colonial America, it was very easy to tell the difference between a free person and an enslaved one. Free people looked like they came from Europe, and enslaved people looked like they came from Africa. But things got a lot more complicated with the mixing of races. Racial mixing presented many problems for white colonists. It threatened the clear racial hierarchy they depended on to justify slavery. If someone looked white but had African ancestry, it became harder to enforce who could be enslaved and who was entitled to rights. It also challenged the idea that whiteness and the power that came with it was pure and exclusive. White colonists feared that if racial boundaries blurred too much, the entire system of social, economic, and legal control would collapse. For example, in 1655, a mixed-race woman named Elizabeth Key sued for her and her son's freedom in colonial Virginia and won. At the time, early African-descended people still had limited access to the courts, and Elizabeth's case highlighted that legal ambiguity. Her argument was based on 3 key points. 1, her father was Thomas Key, a white Englishman and Virginia legislator, which, under Virginia common law, meant she could inherit his free status. 2, her father had arranged for her to be freed at age 15 through an indenture, but the agreement was not honored. And 3, she was a baptized Christian, which at the time could be considered a basis for freedom. With legal help from William Greenstead, an English attorney who would later become her husband, Elizabeth successfully argued her case. The Virginia General Assembly eventually ruled in her favor, stating that a child of a free man and an enslaved woman should be free, especially given her Christian faith and indentured status. So Elizabeth and her son were freed. But her victory triggered backlash. Just a few years later, in 1662, Virginia flipped English law on its head by declaring that a child's status would follow the mother, ensuring slavery could be passed down through generations. Baptism also stopped being grounds for freedom after 1668. These legal changes stripped protections from future mixed-race children and hardened the racial caste system that would define American slavery. If your mother was enslaved, so were you, no matter who your father was. These laws ensured that mixed-race people were considered Black and thus subject to all the restrictions that came with it. Side note, I feel like the impact of these laws can be felt today when it comes to the perception of mixed-race people. There's this notion that you can tell when a mixed person has a Black mom, and it's usually because that person seems authentically in touch with Black culture. Although this is often said in jest by Black people, it inadvertently legitimizes the idea that racial identity is tied to your mother. Anyway, mixed people, particularly those who had more white ancestry than Black, knew that these laws were extremely unfair and frankly stupid. So they found ways around racial restrictions by passing as white. Passing for white had different implications depending on the time period. In the antebellum era before the Civil War, passing as white was a means of escaping slavery. Once off the plantation, escaped slaves who could pass as white were assumed to be free. Post-emancipation, passing as white was no longer a means to obtain freedom, but it was used by some African Americans to evade segregation and discrimination. Those who were able to pass as white often engaged in what was called tactical passing as white in order to get a job, go to school, or to travel. Outside of these situations, tactical passers still lived as Black people, and for this reason, tactical passing was also referred to as 9-to-5 passing. Some mixed-race people passed as white not just to protect themselves, but to support Black causes.
He thought I was white.
By moving through white spaces undetected, they could access information, resources, and opportunities that weren't available to Black people. In some cases, passing was a deliberate strategy not to leave Blackness behind, but to use perceived whiteness as a tool for resistance. For example, Walter Francis White, a civil rights leader and key figure in the NAACP, passed as white while investigating lynchings and racial violence in the South. Outside of that work, he proudly and freely associated with the Black community. On the other end of the spectrum, some mixed-race people passed as white permanently. They didn't just use it as a short-term strategy, they fully left behind their Black identity.
I'm somebody else. I'm white. White. White!
In some cases, even their white spouses and kids had no idea about their ancestry.
But the baby isn't Black.
This kind of full-time passing was recently brought back into the spotlight as a major plot point in Ryan Coogler's historical horror vampire slasher Sinners. The movie follows Smoke and Stack, identical twin brothers played by one Michael B. Jordan. After making a killing as gangsters in Chicago, the brothers returned to their hometown of Clarksdale, Mississippi to start a juke joint. Basically, the club before it was the club.
In the club, we all fam.
It's 1932, and they're in the thick of the Jim Crow South. Both brothers have fraught romantic relationships that resurface upon their arrival. Stack runs into his ex, Mary, right before opening night. Mary is 1/8 Black, the daughter of a white man and a mixed-raced woman. Even though she looks white, the Black folks who know her background still see her as one of their own. Mary is furious with Stack, accusing him of abandoning her because he missed her mother's funeral. but Stack insists he stayed away to protect her. Mary lives her life passing as white, and being with Stack would have exposed the truth and ruined everything she built, including her marriage with a wealthy white man. Mary is played by Haley Steinfeld, an actress who has both Asian and African American ancestry by way of her grandfather, who was half black and half Filipino, making her 1/8 black and a near genetic match for this character, especially considering the fact that there's just not that many 1/8 black people in Hollywood.
There's not a lot of white passing black girls in Hollywood.
When I first watched Sinners, however, I did not know this. And when I sat there in the theater and it was revealed that Mary was considered black, I had to roll my eyes. I was like, how is it possible that just a couple years ago, this same actress could play Snow White Emily Dickinson and now suddenly she's black? Make it make sense. But now, having this knowledge about her ancestry and having researched the one drop rule, this casting choice makes perfect sense. I don't think I was the only one who found it shocking that someone who benefits from white privilege in 2025 could 100 years ago have had her life threatened due to black ancestry. I feel like this aspect of Sinners really woke up how absurd yet real racial categorization is. Let's say Haley Steinfeld could time travel back to the late 1800s in the Mississippi Delta. Someone like her, who's 1/8 black, might have had a few different options. Like Mary, she could have passed full-time as white, or she could have passed part-time, maybe just to get a job. Or she could have chosen not to pass at all and fully align herself with the black community. Maybe even claim her 40 acres and a mule if she was also a man. Back then, someone with that background could, to some extent, choose their own racial identity. Today, because we no longer have laws enforcing slavery or segregation, there's no real reason for someone who's 1/8 black to pass for white, because race isn't legally tied to ancestry anymore. Race is not biologically real, but it is a social reality. Currently, race is pretty much determined by how you are perceived. So if you look white, like someone who's 1/8 black often does, you are treated as white. You're not breaking any laws or pulling one over on anyone. You're a white person with black ancestry. Today, a lot of people would describe a person with this genetic makeup as white passing, and I think that's a misnomer. Firstly, because the proper term is passing for white, and secondly, because passing is active. It is making a concerted effort to be accepted as white. In 2025, a 1/8 black person does not have to make a concerted effort to be accepted. They simply are treated as white. Using the term white passing is like trying to fit a D battery into a AAA slot. It just doesn't work with our current framework. Even someone like the rapper Logic, who is referred to as white passing due to the fact that he looks white but has a black parent, this man quite literally is doing the opposite of passing because he is very vocal about the fact that he is half black.
Somebody pinched me, black man screaming trying to convince me I'm not black. So why the white man want to lynch me? Damn, my skin fair, but life's not.
If he was truly passing, he would be actively denying his black ancestry and trying to distance himself from it. Even though white people might assume Logic is white, that doesn't necessarily mean he is passing for white, because he's not doing anything to convince them of it. He is being treated as he is perceived. They perceive him as white. I just want to hammer in the point that passing is supposed to be an active choice, which is why I think the term white passing is very unhelpful. It's a bastardization of the original term. And I've noticed that on the internet, when people call someone white passing, it is almost always solely based on their appearance, not their choices. And as we know from Mary and Sinners, passing for white is active and requires the trust and participation of your community. This is why I believe that white passing and passing for white should not be interchangeable. Passing for white is a choice, and white passing is based on how you are perceived. If you still can't conceptualize that passing is an active choice, think of Hannah Montana, who tactically passed as a regular girl so she didn't have to be a full-time pop superstar. While the term white passing is not very useful in the 21st century, it does offer some people a shorthand for the experience of looking white. This could be the case for someone who is 1/4 Black and grew up with a half Black mother. While the one-drop rule is no longer legally relevant, socially, it still impacts how mixed-race people are perceived. In a 2010 study, psychologists at Harvard University found that individuals who were a 50-50 mix of white and Black were almost never identified as white. Furthermore, on average, Black-white biracials had to be 68% white before they were perceived as white. Of course, it is possible to be perceived as mixed race, but still, many mixed people are automatically assumed to be Black because of the one-drop rule. Notable examples include Barack Obama, Tiger Woods, and Halle Berry. And I understand that this is very frustrating to non-mixed Black people because a lot of the times mixed race people end up being the face and the representation of Black people. When coming from the perspective of a non-mixed Black person, I think it's a lot easier to tell if a mixed person is mixed with white and not just fully Black. There's definitely a erasure that occurs because of the one-drop rule and because mixed race people are just automatically assumed by white people to be Black. Like, we've seen this a lot with actresses like Zendaya, Yara Shahidi, Amanda Stenberg, who to an average Black person, it's pretty clear that they are mixed race. However, to white people, they are just Black representation. Honestly, I wish it was more common for mixed race people, especially in like movies and TV shows, to be represented as mixed race and not just as Black. Because of colorism, texturism, and featureism, it does feel very unfair that people with features that are closer to whiteness are held up as the standard for Blackness. Even if a mixed person ends up having a child who is 1/4 Black and regularly perceived as white, that child still has the experience of growing up with a non-white parent because their mixed parent was perceived as Black. So in this situation, the term white passing could be a way for a 1/4 Black person to acknowledge how they look without erasing their ancestry and experiences. Like, I can genuinely sympathize with people who do not want to be called just white, even though they look that way, when they truly had the experience of growing up with a parent who was perceived as a non-white person, because that does impact your life and your experiences, and I don't think it's fair to just completely erase that. Still, if this person is not trying to hide the fact that they have Black ancestry, they are not making the choice to pass for white, so it's not a fully accurate term. In fact, I think now more than ever, people are extremely open about their Black ancestry and often use it as a tool for clout chasing, rage baiting, or just being plain old corny.
Someone who is 3/4 massa and 1/4 coon. These are the confessions of a quadroon.
All of this is to say, I think the term white passing should be retired because we have honestly lost the plot with it. Last year, a commenter referred to the popular Black influencer Clark as white passing. What about this girl is white passing? Absolutely nothing. Like, I think people just don't know what this word means anymore. So what does a post-white passing world look like? Writer Joe Brown believes that the term should be replaced with access to whiteness. In a 2021 blog post, she writes, "What does it mean for an individual to have access to whiteness? First, instead of saying that whiteness is a fixed characteristic within an individual, it tells us that whiteness is a socially constructed mechanism. It also tells us what happens when a person can be read as white, not simply that they are passing for white, but that they can access and therefore utilize the powers and privileges of whiteness. Lastly, it implies that an individual's whiteness isn't a constant, but rather it fluctuates. They may or may not access whiteness depending on the situation. I think access to whiteness is such a smart and succinct term to replace the messiness and inaccuracy that comes with white passing. Joe also clarifies that access to whiteness should not be co-opted by people with white parents. After all, just white is a perfectly accurate descriptor. She goes on to write, access to whiteness is a better term because unlike the concept of passing, it can be extrapolated to non-Black racial and ethnic groups. It at least begins the conversation about the effects of being perceived and received by society as white. The phrase also talks about whiteness rather than being white. That is, it demonstrates that whiteness is a constructed, subjective concept rather than a fixed characteristic. In addition, access to whiteness locates racial categorization and the benefits that accompany being categorized as white within social structures and processes instead of a singular person and their physical traits. The fact that this term can be applied to non-Black people is also a great aspect of it. It reminds me of the racial politics of the most recent season of Love Island, where we saw non-white women whose access to whiteness allowed them to fetishize Black men. I also think access to whiteness more accurately describes someone like Kim Kardashian compared to the terms white woman or white passing. Because of her immense privilege and frequent cultural appropriation, many people have deemed her as white. This never fully sat right with me because when I look at Kim Kardashian, especially before all her extensive plastic surgery, I don't see a white woman. However, if you do see a white woman, that is fine and also valid because whiteness is not a fixed characteristic in an individual. Access to whiteness acknowledges that race is a social construct, not a biological one. At one point, Jewish, Irish, and Italian people weren't considered white, but over time, they were absorbed into the category of whiteness because it served the dominant power structure. That absorption didn't happen because those groups changed, but because the definition of whiteness shifted to include them. It was a strategic expansion. But please don't drag it. Like Italian people, for example, y'all have been white long enough that y'all are just white now, okay? Y'all are not new to this. When we talk about access to whiteness, we're talking about how some people can benefit from proximity to whiteness without being fully claimed by it or even fully claiming it themselves. It's not about pretending to be white, it's about being allowed in temporarily or conditionally, depending on how you look, who you're around, and what whiteness needs from you in that moment. So if you take away anything from this video, I really hope that we should be abandoning the word white passing, because the way people use it incorrectly is honestly one of my biggest pet peeves. I would love to hear all your thoughts below. I think this will be a very interesting comment section, but keep it civil, y'all. Keep it civil. But yeah, I'll see you in my next video. Bye!